All right. It says that we are live. So, welcome everyone to our Sound for Video session. Today is the 21st of June, 2020. And happy Father's Day to the fathers out there. And then we'd like to welcome a very special guest today. We have Lenny Balistreri, who is joining us here. Lenny, thanks so much for joining.
Perfect pronunciation, Curtis. Thank you for having me.
You bet. I've been practicing for the last 24 hours, so we got it. I think we got it nailed. And thanks everyone in the audience here for joining up today. We did have some really good questions that we'll come back to in just a minute here. So what I'd like to do here, let me just put up on my screen here, and I'm going to have to change the view here really quickly. Okay, there we go. Just a quick kind of cover some business really quickly, and then we'll get over to Lenny and talking with Lenny and answering some of your questions. So first of all, there are some updates to the Fairlight course. We updated some of the segments. So for those of you that are doing your editing in Fairlight, and even those that have already purchased the course, we've updated it to work with, or re-recorded it to version 16.2.3. And actually the 0.3 version just came out, I think earlier this week. So just Thursday or Friday. So that's good news. And then the session or the segments that we have there have to do with a quick mix and mixing bumper music into your overall piece. So that's good. And then we also have another piece coming where we're going to do railroading, what's called railroading. So look for those if you are already subscribed for that course or are looking to. Second up, Rodecaster Pro, Pocket 4K, and the ATEM interconnect. There's a lot of people have been asking, hey, can I use my Rodecaster Pro to do live streaming? And of course the answer is yes, but there's some kind of things to take into consideration. What I've found is with the Rodecaster Pro, they have some monitor outputs, which presumably are line level. And what I found is I had to use a cable, something like this. So we've got 2 1/4-inch TS on one side, and then a 3.5 millimeter TRS on the other side. This will come over to your, this goes into the camera. And so what I found is that when I switch the Pocket 4K to line level, it's not coming at quite full line level. So it looks like the Rodecaster Pro's outputs are not maybe consumer line level. I'm not sure exactly what they would call that, but there are some challenges there, but it does work overall. And then you can feed HDMI out of the camera into the ATEM and get a beautiful signal. Now, I'll also be doing some testing. The reason I'm bringing all this up is because a ton of questions. And secondly, because people want to test a whole bunch of different combinations. Going from the Rodecaster Pro directly into the ATEM Mini Pro still appears to be a little bit problematic, but I'll be doing some testing and we'll get back to you with details on that. So a couple of other things. Premiere Pro. Good news for Premiere Pro editors. Evidently, you can now convert audio timecode to metadata timecode in the latest version of Premiere Pro CC. So for those that are Premiere Pro users and have been waiting for a long time, you're using a camera that does not have a dedicated timecode input, but you are using an external timecode generator to record what essentially audio on the audio track, some timecode. Now Premiere Pro can convert that for you. So that's really good news for folks on that front. All right, that is enough for the news. Let's get over to Lenny. Lenny, tell us, if you would, a little bit about your background. You have a long career in audio, and I'd be really interested if you could maybe take us back to the start and tell us how you got into that and what brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. Thank you again for having me. I really appreciate it. My Rodecaster Pro is on its way. I can't wait to get it, by the way. I just heard you talking about that. I'm so excited to mess with it. So I have been a musician, writing music ever since I was a kid. I play the drums, I play everything. I would trade it all to play one thing really well. I just play everything a little bit, you know? So just with my love of music and stuff, I interned at a radio station. I ran into a production director who kind of, I guess he saw me working with some of the equipment when I was like 16, and he's like, hey, what are you doing? And tell me about yourself. And then it was awesome. He was the one, definitely, his name was Jeff Prentice, and he was one of the guys that really took me under his wing. And that was back in, still, we had an 8-track reel-to-reel that we were doing all the commercial production on. But he really taught me the fundamental stuff about running a studio, producing 60-second and 30-second spots in a radio station. And then I interned with him for a while. Then I board opt. I ran the board on some of the overnight shows. And then I was the morning show producer there for a little bit. And then I was on there. And then I've been in radio ever since, always working. I did have a brief stint producing some award shows in Los Angeles for a while and doing some consulting work. And I had a prep service, which supplied content for DJs and ran that for a while, which is interviews and things like that. But and in addition to that, more recently, I'm doing editing for video and audio. And currently I'm working as a content producer for a series of radio morning shows here in San Diego. And a lot of the stuff we do is YouTube videos and things like that. So preparing compelling, concise visual content, I think we do like 15 videos a day.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just a lot, but there's a team working on stuff, and it's a lot of fun, and it's changing all the time. So I'm the guy that if something's buzzing or they don't know how to connect it, call Lenny. So I love that stuff. I could talk about EQ and compression all day. My wife rolls her eyes when I bring the subject up, but that's why I'm happy to be here, because we could talk about that.
That's right.
It's invited.
No eye rolling here.
Right.
Very cool. So actually, when I'm actually let's just dive into that topic. I think that's a really good one. And if you did get a call and someone saying, "Hey, there's buzzing," fix it. What's your process? How do you solve a problem like that?
Yeah, like let's say for a broadcast studio or
Yeah,
maybe like a home studio. Yeah.
Well, let's say live broadcast. So
Okay.
they're on air. It's crunch time. You got to fix it now.
Yeah. The first thing I would do is look at the mic processors, and every live, because it's a live multi-microphone setup usually, whether it's out in the field or in the studio, we've got a series of mic processors. And that's the first thing, because people mess with them when they don't know what they're doing. So that's what I would look at first to make sure that the lines are working okay. Everything in a radio station is computer-based, the music, the commercials, and it's all playlists and things now. So you'll have a chunk of audio that's running commercials, music, and then break to talk or whatever the format may be. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and all the boards are digital now too. So really it's a matter of, starting from the mic and just kind of going through the process. And, usually you could quickly, what do you call it, eliminate certain pieces of equipment. Okay, it's coming, it's on the meters here, it's not there, so it's nothing that way. Let's look here forward, and you just kind of go piece by piece. And it really helps to not read. It helps to not read the manual and play with it first, then read the manual, and then play with it again, and then you should know it. You should be able to diagnose it.
Okay, interesting. So, and that's an interesting thing you bring up. And I actually found that rings really true to me in terms of play with it first until you get stuck, or at least until you get stuck or stuck a few times, and then go read the manual, and then go back to playing around with it some more. I think that a lot of us have a tendency to not read the manual and just kind of, something's wrong,
half of the fun, right?
But good stuff. Okay. Well, I think we do have a couple of questions. What I'd like to do is let's go tackle the questions that were submitted ahead of time, if you don't mind,
Sure.
and then we'll come back and talk some more about some of the things you're doing. Okay. Let me pop over here really quickly. All right. Let's hop ahead here to our questions. This is actually kind of a long one, so it's broken up on two slides. I want to ask about capturing audio from a teacher in a K through 12 classroom setting. With COVID-19, many teachers may deliver an in-person lesson to one group of students, while another group of students joins via video conference. Often this will be done via Microsoft Teams, Google Meet, or Zoom. Some teachers may use StreamYard or other similar platforms. Here are some ideas I've come up with. Would love to hear a discussion about this and how we could create an easy-to-use and affordable solution for education. And then he points out a variety of different items here. Kyle does. Number one, and let's just kind of talk through these one by one here from your perspective, Lenny. So point a shotgun mic at the teacher, perhaps, and he cites a specific microphone. Mm-hmm. Requires training the teacher to stay in front of the microphone. Also requires an XLR to USB adapter interface, connect to the teacher's PC laptop, perhaps an Audient Evo 4. So let's cover that one first. What are your thoughts on that?
All right. First, I would say I'm going to step back one bit, because I think this is important, and this is what I hopefully can help bring a little bit of a different angle. I think the most important part of audio, and you've said this, that audio may be 60% of a presentation or whatever it is, and the video is a little bit less. Audio is really important to connect, and especially I think with kids in her situation, I forget, or was it a guy? I can't remember. Kyle.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In his situation, it is imperative, and this is at the center of everything that I do, that the the better you can do a job at making an emotional content with your audience, the better your message is going to get through and it's going to be received. So that should be the center of everything. So right away, the shotgun mic, I mean, I like the idea. It's going to be costly. It's not the best, and you're going to get some noise. And like you said, the teacher couldn't move, or you need a mic operator with a boom and stuff. It could work. I'm sure they can get it work, but it wouldn't be my favorite option.
Okay, cool. That's totally fair. I think that's what they're looking for here. So let's go back and look at the second one here. There we go. Wireless lavalier, such as a Rode Wireless Go, again requires teacher training to set it up and connect XLR to USB. Actually, it's a 3.5 mil output, so you could actually dispense with the XLR in that case. But what are your thoughts on that one?
I probably like that better because it's the best thing you could do is get the microphone as close to the source as possible, because whatever's closer is going to be louder than any of the other ambient noise. And I'm sure there's a lot of noise in a big room or whatever, and it's not treated, and there's probably a tile floor or something, whatever. So I like that. That one I'd go with so far.
Okay, cool. Let's look at number 3 then. Let's see. 3, basic USB conference room mic. The MXL AC404 seems like it might be my best option. If there are higher quality ones, I'd be willing to spend $200 more or so. And I think this one, if I'm not mistaken, that might be a boundary mic. Not 100% sure.
The AC404? It might be. You can. There's a misconception, I think, in a lot of these types of questions, or the people that maybe in a situation like this looking for a solution, that a better mic or spending more money may not give you a better sound. To be honest, you can get kind of a cheap mic, and if you use it the right way, I guarantee you can get a better sound than someone who has an expensive mic and doesn't know what they're doing with the room treatment and stuff. So, that mic may be good if the teacher can get it close to them and be in a place where there's not as much echo and things. So I still like the lav mic better. Then especially a boundary mic is made to kind of pick up the ambience and everything around. So again, you're not going to have that really close to the mic personal connection when you're trying to get to a kid that really just wants to go to recess.
That's another good point. All right, number 4 here. Let's take a look. Find a way to integrate a Google Home or Amazon Alexa into the video conference. The microphone arrays on these devices should be good at this sort of situation. I'd love for someone just to make one of these that was just a microphone and had a USB. I don't know specifically about those. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, my thoughts on that again is it's all the Amazon, all those mics, especially a service like that, they have an AGC, automatic gain control, which is a compressor basically. And what it's going to do is amplify the quiet sounds and tamp down the loud sounds. So again, that's going to actually make it more difficult. And I'll use this. One of the things we do with the radio all the time, and one of the reasons why broadcast studios have room treatment and they're in a booth, really, even if it's 4 or 5 people, they're in a studio, which is a booth, because when you're trying to engage people on the radio, there's a lot of distraction. They're probably in their car, and so you're already the other thing that they're doing, when they're listening and stuff. So there's always distraction. So you want to try to make it as clear as possible. And this would be a case like that. Is if I have to strain to kind of understand what the teacher is saying, it's not the best option. And a compressor like on Alexa or a device like that is going to just add extra noise that's going to not be a benefit to your message to try to send.
Yep, those are definitely a challenge there. Okay, number 5, use a dedicated video conferencing solution such as Meeting Owl. I like this option except for the cost. And so for those that are not familiar with that is, I've actually seen some of these before. So they're basically something you put in the center of the table in a conference room.
Yeah.
They've got 360-degree cameras and a microphone array of some sort, as well as a speaker array. And the idea is that it automatically switches. So whoever's talking, it switches to that camera, it switches to that microphone and attenuates some of the others. They actually work pretty well, but they are quite expensive.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I don't have experience specifically with a mic. We do have a mic in our conference room at work that does a pretty good job. Again, it really depends on the room that you're in. If your room is marble, forget it, like a
Forget
bathroom
it.
or something. It's just going to echo and it'll be really difficult. So it really depends on the settings.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so if you were in Kyle's shoes, what would you do? Would you choose one of these options, or is maybe something else worth considering?
Yeah, I actually would try something a little bit different. And I don't know, but this is the first thing that came into my head when I saw those questions is what I would do. Did Kyle say he's probably gonna use something like StreamYard, like what we're using right now? Is that correct?
Exactly. Yep.
With StreamYard, I believe we can add another person. Is that correct?
Yep.
Could. So what I would do if I was Kyle, I would take his iPhone and I would add it as another person, and I would have her talk into the mic, into the iPhone as the third interviewer. So the third interview is just audio, and then mute the camera for the teacher. This is the audio. Yeah, it may look weird, or maybe you could put a graphic or something up there. But if these actually, the iPhone mics are really good. Yes, there's automatic gain control, but if you're this close, I've used this a lot, and for interviews or to capture audio, as long as you position it the right way, you kind of have to know to. I sometimes will put a wind filter, a little
Furry
foam, or anything I could kind of get on there, and that works really good. But if she's able to walk around, then she can go all over the place, and this would be the source of the audio, which you could use as a third feed. That's what I would do. Doesn't cost anything except you got borrow your buddy's iPhone, and make sure it's charged, and you're good to go.
Interesting. I had not thought of that. That's a brilliant, brilliant thought.
Yay! I did good.
Very good. So, Kyle, thanks for that question. That was a good one, and I think really relevant in today's world here, where with the pandemic situation, we have to figure these things out. I can't tell you how many questions and emails I've gotten from a lot of university professors.
Yeah.
Just been going back and forth with some because they're looking at the fall, and in some cases, the schools are trying to open where they can, but some of them are also saying, like my daughter, for example, is studying music, and the music school is like, we're in the same rooms blowing through brass instruments and woodwind instruments, and that's just not, it's just not going to work in the current situation. So,
you know what? I just want to add one thing. And the reason why a solution like that would pop into my head is because radio, traditionally and more now than ever before, has no budget for anything. So we're always trying to figure out the best solution to get the best audio with the least amount of money. So, we're always kind of thinking in that direction. So that's kind of where that comes from. And a lot of people are in that situation because the Zoom meetings are, that's really what everybody's doing right now.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, good. Thanks for that. Okay, let's go to our next question here. This one is a little bit of a different vein, but I think a really, again, thoughtful question from our friend Rob. And Rob, also thank you for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. It's good to have you here today. Rob says, I do a movie review and analysis live stream with a friend of mine once a week. I produce the show from my home while he calls in via webcam from his home. I use StreamYard as a streaming platform to both YouTube and Facebook. My co-hosts and I are PC folks. Have a couple of questions. Number one, is there another PC platform that allows me to both monitor the end result and to control my co-host's audio before it hits the stream? Have you or your guest tried to have a Skype or Zoom conversation with your co-hosts inside an OBS studio broadcast? So let's start with that. Do you have any experience with that, Lenny?
I do a little bit. And here's what I've found, and I know every week there's another software platform that comes out, and people are figuring things out that are better. With my experience right now, and I'm pretty familiar with like StreamYard and OBS and live stream, and I've sniffed around all those things just to see what they can do and see what the latest is. If I was in that particular situation right now, to me that sounds like one step above too complicated for a software on a PC, and also to be reliable if you're going live, and then getting confused with monitoring versus what's going out. I mean, it's a lot, I think, for any software that's available now. If I was in that situation, I would look at, and I want to make sure I get the name right. Give me 1 second. It's called Source Connect, and it's by Source Elements. Are you familiar with that? Have you heard that?
Seems like that's something that's used a lot in voiceover.
Voiceover, yeah. So like professional voiceover studios, it's basically an ISDN, which is a high quality audio connection through the internet, but you used to have to use really expensive equipment, but now you can do it over the internet. I think they have a free account, but I don't know how. I think maybe it's 15 minutes at a time. But so my point is, I would use either a separate computer to try to connect with his friend and get that audio, and I would run it through a small mixer. And
Okay.
that's what I would do, because you could set it up ahead of time before you go. You could log. So he's coming in, the guest is coming in through a really high quality line. I mean, you could also use Skype too, and it would sound better than a phone. And I would have either on a laptop, a separate computer, have that coming in as a source, my mic coming in as a source, that whole thing going to a feed, and then you could monitor that separately. And you could look at the levels, and it's not going to choke from a software standpoint in the middle of your thing, just because that sounds like a lot to be able to do, to monitor two different streams from separate platforms and then not have a delay and all that stuff that is, that would cause problems while you're broadcasting. That's what I would do.
Cool. Okay, great. That sounds like another good solution. There are a couple of thoughts that I have as well, if you don't mind me adding.
Yeah, sure.
CleanFeed's another service that's very similar to Source Connect. Really, I think probably primarily made for podcast recording, but
Right.
you could get the feed via that, and they bring it into a mixer, as you say, which is another option there. I think the challenge is going to be there, and I don't know if it'd be the same with Source Connect, but my sense is that for CleanFeed, for example, one of the focus is really on using a really high quality audio codec. So they're using Opus, and I'm not entirely clear, but I think there could potentially be more latency with something like that, and it could be variable latency too. If it's a kind of a fixed latency, that's one thing, but if it's variable, then that kind of all bets are off at that point.
Right.
So that's one of the challenges there. And then there are a couple of new, as you say, there are new platforms popping up all the time right now. So there are two that I've kind of experimented with. One is Riverside.fm. Definitely does have pretty high quality audio. It's really made for podcast recording, but it will also do video and it will also stream, but it doesn't give you the flexibility. So here, for example, someone had mentioned earlier, let's see here. There's a comment earlier on saying thank you for so this format we're using here today was just kind of you and us side by side filling the entire screen. They were really appreciative of that.
Oh, cool.
And that's one of the things, just in terms of format, instead of two little 16 by 9s, not filling the entire screen. But the idea, I think, is that's where you don't get a lot of flexibility with Riverside.fm just yet. It's just it's really basic on that front. The other one I've been working with a company who is in beta as well, or they may actually be in alpha, is a company called Stream Voodoo. And they make, theirs is super high quality. Like you can do 4K streaming and very high quality audio as long as you've got the bandwidth to support it. And so they're in the process of working on an app there. It can run in Chrome browser for now, but some really cool things coming our way. So there's some potential opportunities coming here pretty quickly, Rob. I think you're going to find your options are going to open up quite a bit here in the next little bit. So, all right. So Lenny, tell us. Here's a question I have. When just doing little live streams like this, tell us about your signal chain today. What are you using today?
Okay. Right now I'm going really easy, and it sounds great when the air conditioner's not on in this room. I've got a Sennheiser ME66 shotgun mic, and I'm going through the DBX 286S because it's just simple and easy, and it's got a gate on it. And then just going directly to my Focusrite. I love Focusrite stuff, and that's it.
Okay.
The DBX, it's such a great piece of simple gear to just put anything like this over the top. It just makes it thick, and the gate's great. The preamp, the de-esser, the compressor, and the gate, all four things for such an inexpensive price. It's kind of and it's a standard broadcast in studios across the country. You'll see them everywhere.
Yeah, and it is. I think that's the thing that a lot of us that are first starting on streaming have to figure out the hard way. Is that the trick is going to be you are streaming to a live audience. So basically, you need to get the audio right, as it's happening. There's no post processing.
Right.
And that's where compression helps quite a bit if you've got an environment where you've got enough control or you're using a dynamic microphone. Getting it to a reasonable loudness is part of the challenge. And it seems like with that combination of processors, you can get there pretty easily. And I might add, if you're trying to figure out how to kind of tune in the 286S, that Lenny has a great video, a tutorial over on his channel that you might check out. I
Thank you.
can't remember what was the title of that one. I don't remember the title, but
I think I've changed it. Just had a walkthrough. It's just the
okay.
DBX 286 walkthrough, I think.
Okay.
But
Okay.
yeah, I try to go in layman's terms, and instead of giving you a number to shoot for, or to say,
Mhm.
it's more about what am I listening for? I want to try to get it more this and more that, and here's why. And
Yeah.
so if you have that know-how, you can kind of walk through. It's taken me, and I'm still learning. I'm not kidding. It's taken me literally years to understand compression from a music recording standpoint.
Hmm.
Compression is used everywhere on drums and guitars and vocals, and it's such a cool tool. And there's so many different types of compressors. But I'm just a fan. I don't know why. I'm very passionate about just dialing a sound in. It's very, very cool to be able to come up, to use these little tools to make stuff really sound in your face and present, and come up with a good sound.
Yeah, for sure. You touched on one thing there as a musician. You've really kind of become a student of, how to make a compressor work the best it possibly can in every situation. That's an area where I wish I had a little more background. How has being a musician helped you from the standpoint of doing audio engineering?
A lot, because it's a really um, micro way to learn, I think, because dialing in for all the different frequency spaces in a song, and EQ and compression work in tandem, and then mastering on top of that, it's just this layer. And I understand when they say recording artist, because a producer and someone that can work all that stuff is really the fifth member of the band,
Hmm.
because you can have a hit song and it's a hit with one producer and it's not with another producer. There's a presence and there's a punch and there's all these things that you can do. You really can be creative with all the effects. EQ and compression does much more than I ever thought it could, once you kind of learn how to do it. And it's putting the audio pieces in the correct frequency space and then molding them, really. With compression and EQ, you're sculpting the audio with volume, with space, if it sounds far back, if it sounds up close, and you're able to kind of make this spatial art. It's I love it. I don't know why,
It's
but I
pretty
do.
cool.
Yeah.
So panning is not the only way to make
No,
the spatial experience.
no, not at all.
And so so okay, so that's where EQ can make something sound closer or farther away, and likewise compression can do that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll give you an example of how even using compression, and I think this is what people say, oh, your voice sounds good if you hear it in one situation where it's being processed with a compressor or something, and then, oh, it just sounds, amateur here. I think, like, if you were to, I'm gonna go get a little ethereal here for a second and follow me. If you were to close your eyes and stand in a room in your living room, right, with no furniture, if
Hmm.
you were to close your eyes and walk towards the wall and say, I'm speaking out loud, I'm speaking out loud, and you slowly walk to the wall, your mind will actually create an image. And as you get closer, because it's bouncing off, right?
Hmm.
So as you get closer to the wall, you'll know you're getting closer, because it's like a bat, right? With the radar, you'll hear the bounces. It comes back, and we do this subconsciously. But what
Hmm.
happens is a bigger space. You could use with reverb and effects, and maybe not using compression, to have a space that's big sounding gives the impression of wide open, versus a sound where there's no echo gives an intimate, kind of really close. So if I were an audiobook producer and I'm trying to paint a picture and suck somebody into a story, I want that
Hmm.
up close. And that's what I talk about making an emotional connection with the listener, no matter what you're doing. It could be a hard sell for cars. Hey, right now it's 20% off this Father's Day weekend only.
Hmm.
Whatever it is, the person who uses those tools, in addition, that's like a movie soundtrack. if you watch an action movie or a horror movie with no soundtrack, it's like half of the emotion, right? So, to be able to mold the audio to amplify the emotional sentiment of whatever you're doing, whether it's a marketing message, you're telling a story, it's an audiobook, it's a commercial, it's leverage. And compression is a great tool for that. And there's many different aspects of it, and EQ as well.
Yeah. In fact, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to talk a little bit more about compression. So let's talk about it in the context of spoken word content for now. So let's say we're talking about podcasts, we're talking about maybe a dialogue-driven narrative film, or we're talking about any sort of voiceover situation. What's your general approach with compression? So you already kind of conveyed, okay, I'm really trying to make a kind of an intimate sound, something that's a little bit drier. So it's going to sound a little bit probably warmer and a little bit more up close and intimate. How do you approach that with compression?
Yeah, the biggest thing is there music behind this theory?
Let's say no.
Just
let's
voice.
No
Okay,
just
good.
voice.
Because you would approach it differently. What I would do is the first thing, because compression brings up the quieter sounds, and you may be hearing the air conditioner in my room because that's what's happening here. It's not treated. It's important if you want to try to get. I would want to try to get that up front in your face. It's hard to describe unless you hear like a compressed and a completely uncompressed. Yes, it evens out the volumes, but an end result is that it kind of really sounds really close to you and close in your face, kind of a forward sound.
Yeah.
So the first thing I would do is try to make sure the room was treated even before I was going to do the compression. But if you go, I would generally try to. There's really a couple things I would want to do. I would want to try to even out the volumes, but I would also, so you can use a compression lightly, you can use it heavily. I would try to use it lightly in the beginning while I was recording, just to try to even out the peaks, and you know what I mean? So the dynamic range is a lot more consistent. That's the first thing that I would do. And if it was being recorded, I would do a heavier compression later on to bring that forward kind of part out. And also, it gets complicated quickly. Everything that you produce, StreamYard through YouTube, they compress it. When you put something on the radio, it gets compressed again. So it's easy to overdo it, and you kind of have to try it, test it, listen back. Watch the reel of the football game. You watch back and hear your mistakes and go again. So I would start light, 2-to-1, 3-to-1 ratio to give you some specifics, and maybe 3 to 5 to 7 dB of gain reduction.
Okay. So good starting point. Can you do me a favor? Do you have your 286S available? Can you do the bypass switch and talk to us?
I can. Okay, well, first of all, you're going to hear the room noise is much louder because the gate. And, I agree that it's not that different until
it actually is. It is quite different.
On your end, you can hear it?
Yeah, I can hear it.
All right. And now the gate, let me shut the gate off because I think that's a big part of what people may be hearing. Okay, so now this is compressed. To me, I can hear that it's kind of pushed down the top a little bit, and then so now it's not bypassed. And now I'm going to bypass it again, and my S's are poking through. My consonants are kind of peaking. The transients are coming through. So it takes the highest stuff and pumps them down a little bit, and then if this is the dynamic range here, it takes the high stuff down, and then with your gain afterwards, you could put the whole thing up so it lives in a higher space. So this is without it, and this is with the compression. It's just more steady, and in between my words, you can hear it kind of bringing up that background. But
even in terms of the timbre of your voice changes a little bit. It does get a kind of, what's the right descriptor? It does, to me, sounds a little warmer. What's the best way to describe that from your point of view?
And what's really cool about the DBX, it's got a gate and also a really simple EQ because, I'm sorry, not a de-esser and an EQ.
Right.
A de-esser basically is a compressor, but just for the frequencies that you're looking at. So that's doing a lot of, it's molding. You're really molding the audio. So yeah, it's strange. The end result, and there's different types of compressors. There's VCA compressors and FET compressors, and they act differently on the material. But the end result of it is it just kind of has that in-your-face forward sound, which brings something closer to you, which is that intimate kind of part.
You brought up an interesting point early on when we started this conversation about compression, and that was, you asked with music behind it or not. So if you do have music behind it, how does that change how you approach compression?
Very, very big, because there's like a second level that I think if you're producing something with music, which is a big radio portion of what I do, if adding music to a marketing message, again, amplifies the sentiment of that emotional connection. It could make you feel one way or the other. But absolutely, my goal when I put music behind something is I want it punchy. I want to feel the music. I want it to envelop the voice, but I don't want it to overtake the voice, because if people can't understand the message, nothing matters. If they can't understand what I'm saying, and it's, from the enunciation to any of the words, if they have to struggle, or if they're fighting something else to pay attention, and there's music, that's a third thing that could bring you off track. You're doing yourself a disservice. So with a compressor, you can, an EQ, this is where EQ comes in too. You can not only carve space in the music, so your voice sits right. So I can lower the frequencies on the music track. I could lower the frequencies of the music where the voice lives. So they're not competing in a frequency space. And then that whole thing, when you add compression to it, when I stop talking, the music appears louder. And when I start talking, the music gets out of the way. So it really wraps around the voice. And again, the end result is this in your face. And if anybody is in a competitive advertising, speaking of the radio world, a competitive advertising environment, I want my commercial to sound better than my competition. And I want my content to sound better than the competition. So there's always that fight to try to get people's attention, keep them engaged. And really, I think a producer who knows how to manipulate the audio has a little bit of an edge and an advantage when you use that stuff.
Yeah. So there are probably a variety of ways you could do that. You could just use a plain old EQ to do something like that. That's you're gonna have to automate it or do something there to kind of bring the levels back up when the person's not talking. But there are now dynamic EQs,
Yes.
Which are basically frequency specific compressors. Is the idea? Is that-
Like a multi-band compressor as well too, sure.
Yep.
Which is used a lot in mastering and for that exact purpose.
Okay. And then if I'm trying to get started on this, I'm going to try and start playing around with this.
Yeah.
Where do voices typically sit? What are the parts of the music where you're going to want to attenuate things to make room for the voice generally?
Generally, just north of the middle, I would say. Maybe the top third of the frequency space. Upper mid range is from a evolutionary standpoint is where the ear is tuned to pay more attention to that. So in that upper mid range, so it's like the upper half of your EQ. You want to scoop out a nice little area. But if your music has horns and music that's in that area, or instruments that are in that area, you want to pay attention to those. But if it doesn't, you may not. So you kind of sweep the frequency and you kind of feel, what is best. And it's easy to overdo it. And then when you add compression, compression amplifies what you do with the EQ. So just a couple decibels one way or the other. I'll tell you what really has helped. I don't know how the old timers used to do it with literally the gear and the Pultec EQs and the stuff that was the big knobs, and they try to do it only by ear, which is amazing. But today's software, I'm a Logic guy, but I've used Pro Tools and all the Adobe stuff and everything. What a great way to just open the compressors and put a voice through it or put music through it and mess with it. I mean, that's really how you learn. And don't read the manual and then read the manual.
Very good. Good. Okay. So you touched on another topic that I think is really interesting as well, and that is kind of order of operations a little bit. So you said, okay, what did you say exactly? It's something about if you when you compress and EQ, the combination of things can really kind of start to change the timbre overall. So how do you usually approach that in terms of EQ, compression, more EQ after? What's your approach generally?
You know what I like to do, basically, I'll start with an EQ first. There's kind of a surgical EQ that I may go for, and I'll tell you why I do this is because I have a bunch of private clients that send me voice from real professional guys to people with a cheap USB mic in their kitchen, and they've got a voiceover gig, and they want me to put music behind it and send it to the clients and do a 30-second version and 60-second edit, whatever. So I get all types of voice material, but what I like to do is I'll use a surgical EQ, which basically means it's to fix the problems first. Now, this is in my Logic channel strip. I'll start with an EQ, then I'll compress it, and then I may do a second EQ, but it's more to raise certain frequencies, wide bands, to say, well, it could use a little bit more bass, and I'll bump it up, or I need some more high air end because I can't hear the consonants and the really high end part in her voice. So the second EQ is more to sweeten. The first one, if there's a resonance in a room that's echoing, I'll find what that frequency is and dip it a little bit, and then it'll sound a lot better. It's a lot of fun to do because, and then you can, you A/B it. You put all the stuff on, EQs and compressor on and off, and you go, wow, it could really do a big. You can't fix everything, but you could really improve. You could make better great, and you could make good better.
Yeah. Listenable, at least.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually I think that's a good mindset to keep in your mind, is that if you're in a situation where you have something that sounds really horrible, the production just missed, it was a complete miss in some fashion, I think it's better to have this kind of healthy perspective that, hey, we can make this so that it will still get the message across, but it's not going to be amazing. And I think really at that point, the focus is intelligibility is really kind of the name of the game at that point, generally. So good. Okay. Well, let's go take a look at the comments here and see if we have any new questions here that maybe something we can throw over your way here, Lenny. Here,
Sure.
Let's see what we've got. Here it is. Mark Randall said earlier on, glad to see you've cropped in the shots, much better format. So there is that. We have some folks. Kenneth is coming at us from Denmark. Thanks for joining us here. Okay, here's a question. Lenny, what do you think about the Neumann KM184 small condenser mics for recording music guitars and for voice recordings for streaming?
I'll tell you, you can't go wrong with a Neumann mic, and a small condenser microphone is really good for stringed instruments. And what they say is a small condenser is really good for capturing transients. I'll tell you what, unless you have, I don't know what level you're at, but you've got to have, several $1,000 preamps and a perfect recording environment. And, your grand piano has to be perfectly tuned if you're using all these Neumann mics and you have a budget for this stuff to hear the difference. You know what I mean? If you're going to do it for streaming, you're good. That's a great mic. You could make it sound good. You have no excuse to not be recording and streaming every day. You can't say it's the mic because, you know what I mean? They're tiny little minute intricacies that people that are purists, I like the KM184 on a violin, but on a viola, I'll use something else. You know what I mean? They're just really small details. But a small condenser mic is generally used for the high-end transients of a recording, stringed instruments, hi-hats on a drum set, that kind of thing. But you're gold. If you've got a Neumann for your voice and that's what you're using, awesome.
Seems like a good
I want to come over and check it out.
Yeah, and is there also? It's my understanding that with small diaphragm condensers, that the off-axis coloration generally is not quite as. It doesn't tend to get as colored when it's off-axis. So if you do have reflections in your room, generally it'll sound a bit more natural, is what I've heard as well. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, it depends on the mic. It's interesting because the more I research and the more I, have experience with different microphones, I mean, they all sound different on purpose. So you have to do less EQing, and the electronics in them are so different. But specifically, because of the capsule, I think you're right. On a condenser, a small, thin, they call them pencil mics too, right?
Hmm.
It'll kind of focus, and then once you get off axis, it's a little darker. And yeah, I think that's pretty right. I don't have that many. I've got one small condenser mic, and I don't have much experience with it, to be honest.
Okay. Okay. Cool. All right. Kyle wanted to say thanks. A good clarification on a 3.5 millimeter output from the Rode Wireless Go when we were talking about Kyle's question here earlier. And then he also said, agree, for teaching, I also use Rode Lavalier mics, either wired or wireless. Good. And love for the win.
Cool.
Yeah, it is. It is a great point from the standpoint that it's a close mic. It follows the teacher. It really is a good fit, really, for that situation. And then Kyle also said, great idea. Teacher using an iPhone for a second device for audio.
Awesome.
Clever. Glad you're here today, Lenny.
I'm proud
I never
of that
would have
one.
thought
That one just pulled that right out.
All right. Somebody else also brought up Clean Feed, which is there is a free version of Clean Feed, and there's also a paid version, so that's another option. Kyle, I agree having two computers helps with the live stream. Can use NDI to connect audio and video, one computer on the other on the local LAN. Okay, so that's another consideration there as well. All right. Let's see here. There's another tech called SRT to connect audio and video across the internet. Is that something you're familiar with?
I'm not, but I'm going to take a note. I'll check it out.
Yeah, good. All right. Oh, and here's actually there's a whole little conversation here. We won't rehash the whole thing, but here over in the chat. All right. Jason brought up any place for sidechain compression when doing background music with voice.
Yes. I've recently been messing with sidechain compression, and should I maybe just give a little brief description of what that is? Mm-hmm. So a compressor, you can tell the compressor to only compress a certain range of material, kind of like a de-esser. You're telling it to only compress the S's, and once that frequency space goes beyond a threshold, it actually just compresses, but only in that space. A lot of the compressors have a sidechain input, so you could actually feed a signal into the compressor, and the compression circuit reacts to what you're feeding it as opposed to everything that's running through it. In terms of like the logic or any DAW compressors in the software, a lot of the compressors have a sidechain where you can have a low pass filter or a high pass filter or a band pass filter, so you could tell it. You could find just a snare drum and say, I only want to compress this frequency range, and that may be where the snare drum lives. I find that using a sidechain with a high-pass filter and letting the voice, for a voiceover, and letting the low end of the voice through and really compressing a little bit more than, a little heavier than normal on a voice has a really great kind of a sound to it, because what happens is if your voice is boomy or there's something in the room or a portion of your voice that's boomy, it's going to bring, the low end comes down, and it'll also bring that high end down. But if you have a sidechain, it'll let the low end go through, and so the low end stays, and only the high material, which where all that frequency space in a voice, all of the sibilants and the peaks are that people recognize to show that it's clear and you can understand the speech. That's where all that lives, in the upper range. So using a sidechain, I've found that it's a pretty cool effect if you can use it the right way. And the DAWs allow you to really play with it a little bit.
Okay, cool. And that's something that's often used in mixing popular music, right? I mean, you use a ton of that. So
Absolutely.
If you've got two instruments kind of operating in the same range, you've got a bass and a kick drum, for example, you might side chain compress just to kind of make room for each of them.
Often a drum bus, which may be all the microphones on a drum set will go to a drum bus, and they do what's called crushing. And then they use parallel compression, which they'll really, really compress it too much and then dial back in some of the dry sound at the same time. It gives it that John Bonham, that Led Zeppelin, big, huge,
Yeah.
boomy, aggressive drums. If you use an FET compressor, and then by side chaining, it also allows you to get more of that really big, huge, aggressive sound, which they do a lot of the drums. And you can dial it back and just give it, or have it only in the choruses, or and you dial it back in the verse or something. It's definitely effect they use a lot.
Yeah. Or go record it in a stairwell like John Bonham did.
That's true. Right in the castle, in the entryway of the castle. I heard that story somewhere.
That's right. Very good. Thanks, Jason, for the comment here. All right. Just a kind of housekeeping one. DJ here asked, will this stream on the channel later on? Yes, it'll be there later on. It'll take a while for it to encode, but it'll be there within a couple of hours after we are done here. All right. Great live stream. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks Lenny, for joining us here.
Cool.
Let's talk about audience engagement. Oh. That was the second part of Rob's question I didn't come back to. Rob, thank you so much for reminding me, and apologies. I'm glad we caught that before we signed off here. So there's another thing. Okay, so our little show is at its heart a conversation about movies, and it's way better when the audience chimes in. How do you folks encourage audience participation? Have either of you or anyone in your audience tried using Discord for audio chat direct with viewers while streaming, similar to how gamers use it? So what's your thought on that, Lenny?
Well, I think, and the reason why I'm hesitating is because it goes pretty deep. I want to share with you from a radio standpoint. I'm a morning show producer. I would never understand this is a different platform, okay? It's completely different. I would never put a live call on the air if I didn't know what it was. Now, I'm talking about in an entertainment type of a situation.
Okay.
They may be a friend of the show. I'd probably let that go because I could expect what they're doing, and they call all the time, and they're a P1, we call them. They're just really, really. My point is, I would by not doing it live, I could record it live, and then when it comes time to that call, I would put it on, and it would sound live. The reason why is every one of my calls is going to be great. Every one of my interactions is going to be good. It's going to be great, because if it's not great, it will get on the air. I'll find a great one and put it on the air. So I want you to understand that I'm coming from that point, and that's a content thing. When it comes to the technical stuff and putting something on, I don't know. In this instance, I might in his situation personally, I think that the Roadcaster, I would have the phone calls come in, via that way. If you're doing live stuff and you're streaming, and this way you can give out the number, call right now. We're doing it now. I mean, that's how I would get people to come in. Or better yet, I would call them a day ahead, email them. I would have a list of people that reached out last time, or I would say, hey, we don't have time. If they called this show, I would say, hey, we don't have time for you for this show, but I want to talk to you next week. Give me your name and number, where you'll be, and I'll call you Monday. And I would go down the list, and I'd front load them all, and it would be great. That's a producer speaking to you. So I'm sorry if it doesn't relate, but that's how I would do it.
No, and it's a fair point. I think when you're employed and you're given a job to do, I don't think that your manager would feel would have a lot of good things to say about you if you brought a live conversation onto the show that just backfired. It just wouldn't work.
There's sponsors involved, and and commercials and time, and all that. So it's a different platform.
Different platform. So here's something that I think is interesting, and I'm glad you brought this up, Rob. So what I love about StreamYard, and we've done this in some of our other live streams like this before, is I love being able to bring individual comments up into the live stream like this. So we're really engaging the audience. You guys get to say stuff, and it gets to come in here. And actually, we need to come back to Jason's. So I think you got to have a second person like a Robin to control an actual live call. And so you probably do need to have a live producer or someone there that can kind of vet things a little bit. These new web platforms that we're seeing enable a lot of stuff that you would never see in live radio or live TV.
Yeah.
So I had talked a little bit, and we've used it at least once on the live stream here before, Riverside.fm. It's fairly early in its product development, but it does allow live people to join. And I actually had considered doing that, but there's a trade-off. So let's see here. Here we go. So score more. Discord is fine to use for audience. However, people would disrespect you, like cussing and such, might ruin your live stream. So definitely some things you got to take into account there. What Riverside.fm does is it allows you have kind of a holding space, so someone can essentially dial in.
Right.
And what you do get is a little text of what they intend to ask, but then as soon as you open up the camera and the mic, anything could happen.
Yeah, you could have people
So,
sabotage your show or, say stuff that you don't want. I mean, who knows?
yeah,
Is it worth the risk?
and that's
Or,
and yeah,
or could it just be good content? I mean, who knows? It depends on how you handle it, really.
you never know. Yeah, and if we're lucky, we have a relatively small audience here. Maybe it would be good. It was a pretty small, intimate audience here. We don't have a lot of hecklers. We've had maybe one show up once, but no big issues. So, in any case, and then Rob says, "Good idea on the second person, sort of an upscale moderator." I would agree with that. Here's just a little clarification. Robin being the perennial assistant to Howard Stern, kind of doing the blocking and tackling, so to speak.
Right, right.
Here's another interesting one. SpeakPipe could be an option to get audio from your audience. Interesting. Kyle, I'll need to go look that one up. Are you familiar with that one, Lenny?
I'm not. I'm writing these down. I'm going to check it out. SpeakPipe.
Okay. Yeah, good. Scoremore says, yeah, definitely ask for questions up front, which is what we do here typically. Here's another one. So you can actually put their answer on your stream. Some people just want to ruin your stuff, so be careful. Okay, that's a fair point. Scrolling down here. And then Kyle clarifies SpeakPipe would be pre-recorded. Okay, cool. All right, we are just about at the top of the hour here, so we probably need to start wrapping things up. Lenny, where do people find you if they want to learn more from what you have to say? Where do you send them?
Yeah, thanks. Just lennyb.com, lennyb.com is the best way to reach out to me. Yeah, and then I've got a YouTube channel. Hey Lenny B is the name of the channel. But
Okay,
yeah, that's
cool.
the best way to reach me.
All right. Well, Lenny, thank you so much for coming on today. Thanks for bringing your perspective, which is really fresh here for us. We've never had anyone with a background in radio come on, and it's been really enlightening, certainly for me, and I think that's the sentiment of the audience here too. So thanks so much.
Thank you for having me. I had a blast. I could talk about this stuff forever, so it was wonderful to do it for the hour. Thank you.
All right. Everyone have a great week, and we'll talk to you again next time around. Get out there and make some good sound. Okay.